Please subscribe, like, and share this video. Thank you for your support.
2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1606, Penalties. A. Civil penalty whoever knowingly fails to 1. Remedy a defective filing within 60 days after notice of such a defect by the Secretary of the Senate or the Clerk of the House of Representatives, or 2. Comply with any other provision of this chapter, shall, upon proof of such knowing violation by a preponderance of the evidence, be subject to a civil fine of not more than $200,000, depending on the extent and gravity of the violation. B. Criminal penalty. Whoever knowingly and corruptly fails to comply with any provision of this chapter shall be imprisoned for not more than 5 years or fined under Title 18, or both. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1607, Rules of Construction. A. Constitutional rights. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to prohibit or interfere with 1. The right to petition the government for the redress of grievances. 2. The right to express a personal opinion, or 3. The right of association, protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. B. Prohibition of activities. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to prohibit, or to authorize any court to prohibit, lobbying activities or lobbying contacts by any person or entity, regardless of whether such person or entity is in compliance with the requirements of this chapter. C. Audit and investigations. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to grant general audit or investigative authority to the Secretary of the Senate or the Clerk of the House of Representatives. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1608, Severability. If any provision of this chapter, or the application thereof, is held invalid, the validity of the remainder of this chapter and the application of such provision to other persons and circumstances shall not be affected thereby. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1609, Identification of clients and covered officials. A. Oral lobbying contacts. Any person or entity that makes an oral lobbying contact with a covered legislative branch official or a covered executive branch official shall, on the request of the official at the time of the lobbying contact, 1. State whether the person or entity is registered under this chapter and identify the client on whose behalf the lobbying contact is made, and 2. State whether such client is a foreign entity and identify any foreign entity required to be disclosed under Section 1603(b)(4) of this title that has a direct interest in the outcome of the lobbying activity. B. Written lobbying contacts. Any person or entity registered under this chapter that makes a written lobbying contact, including an electronic communication, with a covered legislative branch official or a covered executive branch official shall, 1. If the client on whose behalf the lobbying contact was made is a foreign entity, identify such client. State that the client is considered a foreign entity under this chapter, and state whether the person making the lobbying contact is registered on behalf of that client under Section 1603 of this title, and 2. Identify any other foreign entity identified pursuant to Section 1603(b)(4) of this title that has a direct interest in the outcome of the lobbying activity. C. Identification as covered official. Upon request by a person or entity making a lobbying contact, the individual who is contacted or the office employing that individual shall indicate whether or not the individual is a covered legislative branch official or a covered executive branch official. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1610, Estimates based on tax reporting system. A. Entities covered by Section 6033(b) of Title 26. A person, other than a lobbying firm, that is required to report and does report lobbying expenditures pursuant to Section 6033(b)(8) of Title May 26, 1. Make a good faith estimate, by category of dollar value, of applicable amounts that would be required to be disclosed under such section for the appropriate quarterly period to meet the requirements of Sections 1603(a)(3) and 1604(b)(4) of this title, and 2. For all other purposes consider as lobbying contacts and lobbying activities only. A. Lobbying contacts with covered legislative branch officials, as defined in Section 1602(4) of this title, and lobbying activities in support of such contacts, and B. Lobbying of federal executive branch officials to the extent that such activities are influencing legislation as defined in Section 4911(d) of Title 26. B. Entities covered by Section 162(e) of Title 26. A person, other than a lobbying firm, who is required to account and does account for lobbying expenditures pursuant to Section 162(e) of Title May 26, 1. Make a good faith estimate, by category of dollar value, of applicable amounts that would not be deductible pursuant to such section for the appropriate quarterly period to meet the requirements of Sections 1603(a)(3) and 1604(b)(4) of this title, and 2. For all other purposes consider as lobbying contacts and lobbying activities only. A. Lobbying contacts with covered legislative branch officials, as defined in Section 1602(4) of this title, and lobbying activities in support of such contacts, and B. Lobbying of federal executive branch officials to the extent that amounts paid or costs incurred in connection with such activities are not deductible pursuant to Section 162(e) of Title 26. C. Disclosure of estimate. Any registrant that elects to make estimates required by this chapter under the procedures authorized by subsection A or B for reporting or threshold purposes shall 1. Inform the Secretary of the Senate and the Clerk of the House of Representatives that the registrant has elected to make its estimates under such procedures, and 2. Make all such estimates in a given calendar year under such procedures. D. Study not later than March 31, 1997. The Comptroller General of the United States shall review reporting by registrants under subsections A and B and report to the Congress. 1. The differences between the definition of lobbying activities in Section 1602(7) of this title and the definitions of lobbying expenditures, influencing legislation, and related terms in Sections 162(e) and 4911 of Title 26, as each are implemented by regulations. 2. The impact that any such differences may have on filing and reporting under this chapter pursuant to this subsection, and 3. Any changes to this chapter or to the appropriate sections of Title 26 that the Comptroller General may recommend to harmonize the definitions. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1611, Exempt Organizations. An organization described in Section 501(c)(4) of Title 26 which engages in lobbying activities shall not be eligible for the receipt of federal funds constituting an award, grant, or loan. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1612, Sense of Senate that lobbying expenses should remain non-deductible. A. Findings. The Senate finds that ordinary Americans generally are not allowed to deduct the cost of communicating with their elected representatives. B. Sense of Senate. It is the sense of the Senate that lobbying expenses should not be tax deductible. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1613, Prohibition on provision of gifts or travel by registered lobbyists to members of Congress and to congressional employees. A. Prohibition. Any person described in subsection B may not make a gift or provide travel to a covered legislative branch official if the person has knowledge that the gift or travel may not be accepted by that covered legislative branch official under the rules of the House of Representatives or the standing rules of the Senate, as the case may be. B. Person subject to prohibition. The persons subject to the prohibition under subsection A are any lobbyist that is registered or is required to register under Section 1603(a)(1) of this title, any organization that employs one or more lobbyists and is registered or is required to register under Section 1603(a)(2) of this title, and any employee listed or required to be listed as a lobbyist by a registrant under Section 1603(b)(6) or 1604(b)(2)(c) of this title. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1614, Annual Audits and Reports by Comptroller General. 2 U.S. Code Paragraph 1614, Annual Audits and Reports by Comptroller General. A. Audit. On an annual basis, the Comptroller General shall audit the extent of compliance or non-compliance with the requirements of this chapter by lobbyists, lobbying firms, and registrants through a random sampling of publicly available lobbying registrations and reports filed under this chapter during each calendar year. B. Reports to Congress. 1. Annual reports not later than April 1st of each year. The Comptroller General shall submit to the Congress a report on the review required by subsection A for the preceding calendar year. The report shall include the Comptroller General's assessment of the matters required to be emphasized by that subsection and any recommendations of the Comptroller General to A. Improve the compliance by lobbyists, lobbying firms, and registrants with the requirements of this chapter, and B. Provide the Department of Justice with the resources and authorities needed for the effective enforcement of this chapter. 2. Assessment of compliance. The annual report under paragraph 1 shall include an assessment of compliance by registrants with the requirements of Section 1603(b)(3) of this title. C. Access to information. The Comptroller General may, in carrying out this section, request information from and access to any relevant documents from any person registered under paragraph 1 or 2 of Section 1603(a) of this title and each employee who is listed as a lobbyist under Section 1603(b)(6) of this title or Section 1604(b)(2)(c) of this title if the material requested relates to the purposes of this section. The Comptroller General may request such person to submit in writing such information as the Comptroller General may prescribe. The Comptroller General may notify the Congress in writing if a person from whom information has been requested under this subsection refuses to comply with the request within 40